Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into, well, one of the most talked about and complex issues of our time, gun violence and the ever evolving landscape of gun control. It's a topic that touches, every corner of the globe, yet manifests so uniquely in different societies, often reflecting these deep cultural and historical currents. For this deep dive, we've really scoured a huge range of sources, everything from in-depth articles, extensive academic research, to official policy documents from, well, all around the world, and even some really fine-grained details specific to the United States. We're not just looking at raw statistics here, we're exploring the real-world impact of these policies and, the human stories behind them. Our mission today is really to cut through the noise, the strong opinions, and just the sheer volume of information to give you a clear, nuanced understanding of what's truly important in this discussion. We'll explore everything from the almost zero tolerance policies you see in some countries to the latest legislative battles and powerful advocacy efforts right here at home. Prepare for some surprising facts and hopefully a few genuine aha moments that truly help connect the dots.
Yeah, and what's truly fascinating here is that gun violence in its many forms, whether it's, mass shootings, suicides, or that pervasive community violence, it's increasingly being recognized as a critical public health emergency on a global scale. Our sources today reveal a truly striking spectrum of approaches to this profound challenge. We'll see how different nations employ varying prevention strategies, intervention programs, legislative frameworks, all yielding vastly different outcomes. Throughout our conversation, we'll be navigating these international contrasts, examining the rich and often contentious history of U.S. policy, exploring the often oversimplified links between mental health and violence, and highlighting the powerful work of advocacy groups driving evidence-based solutions in the U.S.
Okay, let's kick things off then by looking beyond our borders, because the differences in how countries approach guns and the results they get are truly striking. This global perspective sets a really important context for our discussion here at home, I think.
Absolutely. When we talk about global approaches, Japan often stands out as one of the most, extreme yet incredibly effective models for gun control.
And when you say effective, the numbers genuinely speak for themselves, don't they? The assassination of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in 2022 was a global shock precisely because gun violence is so incredibly rare in Japan. It made headlines worldwide, not just because of who he was, but because the very act of gun violence itself is almost unheard of there. It's a testament to their strict policies.
Right. And this raises an important question for us to consider. How does a nation achieve such dramatically low rates? Japan's model is a stark example of what a society can achieve with stringent controls and a deep-seated cultural framework where gun ownership is simply not seen as an inherent right for private citizens. Handguns, for instance, completely illegal for private citizens. Their approach is truly one of zero tolerance for firearms in civilian hands. It forces us to consider the foundational assumptions about firearms that underpin different nations' policies. In Japan, civilian gun ownership is heavily restricted, often to shotguns or air rifles for specific purposes like hunting or sport shooting, and even then the hurdles are immense. You need to undergo this rigorous multi-stage licensing process that includes safety courses, extensive background checks, even psychological evaluations.
Wow.
And the societal consensus supporting these laws is also incredibly strong, rooted in this cultural value placed on peace and community safety.
Okay, so from Japan's near absolute prohibition, let's turn to Australia. They took a different but equally decisive path after a horrific tragedy. Many of you will remember the 1996 Port Arthur massacre. This event wasn't just a national tragedy. It was a profound turning point that led to some of the most comprehensive gun law reforms we've seen in a Western democracy.
Indeed. Following that massacre, the Australian government, under then Prime Minister John Howard, enacted the National Firearms Agreement. This was a truly remarkable piece of legislation. It included extensive gun buyback programs and significantly stricter licensing requirements. It was a rapid and sweeping response.
And the numbers from that period are just astounding, aren't they? Over 1 million firearms were collected and destroyed,
Yeah.
which was estimated to be about 1/3 of the entire national stock of privately owned guns at the time. On top of that, specific models like semi-automatic rifles and many types of handguns were outright prohibited.
And the impact on violence was immediate and clear. The reforms were followed by a decade without a single mass shooting.
A decade.
And studies observed faster declines in overall firearm deaths and suicides. The data strongly supports that the national buyback and the associated policy changes had a significant effect on reducing gun violence, particularly mass shootings. It also established a robust licensing system, primarily restricting ownership to things like sports shooting, collecting, or security work, with specific storage arrangements mandated too.
But here's where it gets really interesting, a truly surprising twist, because the story doesn't end there. While the reforms were incredibly effective at reducing mass shootings and overall firearm deaths, a recent study from January 2025 found this paradoxical trend. The total number of privately owned firearms has increased by 25% since 1996,
Right, increased.
reaching over 4 million registered firearms, even as the number of licensed shooters has declined. How does that work?
Well, this is a critical nuance, isn't it? And it reveals a deeper complexity. Despite the initial success of the buybacks and the strong public support for the laws, you mentioned polls in 2016 showing 89% of Australians thought the laws were about right or not strong enough, we're seeing this quiet surge in registered firearms. This Australian experience reveals a crucial, often overlooked lesson. While legislative action can dramatically curb mass violence, it doesn't automatically diminish the desire for gun ownership or prevent new acquisitions. It suggests these underlying cultural or market dynamics that even stringent laws struggle to fully address long-term.
It also highlights that even with overwhelming public support, political influence remains a factor. In 2019, reports surfaced alleging that the One Nation political party in Australia was soliciting financial assistance from the NRA, the National Rifle Association of America.
The U.S. NRA.
Yeah, to weaken Australian gun control laws. That's a direct link showing how these issues can cross borders and influence national policy. Another interesting detail is the issue of stolen firearms. While only a tiny fraction, about 0.06% of licensed firearms are stolen annually, those are often long guns taken opportunistically during home burglaries. And a small percentage, around 3% of those stolen weapons, are later linked to crimes, showing how even a tightly regulated system isn't completely immune to diversion into illegal markets.
And we've seen continued action at the state level, too. In 2025, Western Australia implemented sweeping reforms, becoming one of the strictest states in the country. Queensland introduced Jack's Law permanently, allowing police to use handheld scanners in public spaces without warrants, provided their senior officer approval. Apparently, this led to over 2,800 charges and 1,000 weapons seized just during its trial period. Furthermore, a permanent gun amnesty was launched in July 2021, encouraging the surrender of unregistered firearms without penalty. These continued efforts demonstrate an ongoing commitment to adapting gun control to emerging challenges, even if the overall number of firearms is, somewhat paradoxically, increasing.
Okay, so we've seen Japan's tight grip and Australia's decisive post-tragedy action. Let's move to Switzerland, which often gets brought up in these conversations as a unique case. A nation with a high rate of gun ownership, but paradoxically, one of the lowest gun homicide rates.
That's right. Switzerland consistently reports a gun homicide rate of around 0.2 per 100,000 inhabitants, which is, as you noted, about 20 times lower than the U.S. rate. This paradox is largely attributed to a deeply unique weapons culture. Gun ownership is largely tied to obligatory military service, where citizens often keep their service weapons at home, and a strong tradition of highly organized shooting sports. There's rigorous safety training, often starting from an early age. Self-defense, unlike in the U.S., is a very rare and, frankly, largely disfavored reason for gun ownership there.
So it sounds like it's more about a cultural integration of firearms with strict discipline and a focus on sport or military duty, rather than a broad, kind of unfettered right to own for any reason.
Precisely. The cultural relationship the Swiss have with weapons is specific. A mixture of familiarity, rigorous training and safety measures, and individual responsibility. Gunsmiths there, who are often shooters and instructors themselves, note that considering the sheer number of cartridges fired in various events, accidents are extremely rare. Finland is another European country with a somewhat similar profile, strong hunting tradition, high gun ownership, but very low firearm homicide rates. In these European contexts, the research suggests that the size and activity of the criminal underworld are often the main determinants of overall homicide rates, rather than just gun ownership rates alone.
But even in this armed but safe nation, there are concerns. What challenges does Switzerland face despite its impressive statistics?
Well, when we put this in context, one significant challenge is the lack of a central national gun registry. Information on gun ownership is decentralized at the cantonal or state level. This makes comprehensive national analysis difficult. There's actually an ongoing parliamentary debate about creating a central register for improved security and analysis, as many in academic and political circles argue it would improve security and bring Switzerland in line with most other European countries. As one Green Party lawmaker rather pointedly noted, they know how many cats and cows there are in Switzerland, but not how many guns.
Wow, that really puts it into perspective.
Doesn't it? It highlights the data collection challenge. There's also a serious concern about the availability of firearms in the domestic sphere, particularly in tragic situations. Over 80% of incidents in Switzerland where a perpetrator kills a partner and children before committing suicide are carried out with a firearm.
That's sobering.
It is. It highlights that even in a culturally responsible gun environment, the mere presence of firearms can significantly increase lethality in moments of acute domestic crisis. So while Switzerland offers a model where a deeply ingrained gun culture coexists with safety, it underscores that the context of gun ownership, why people own them, their cultural relationship with firearms, plays a significant role in outcomes, far beyond just the sheer number of guns.
Stepping back then, what this global tour reveals is a kind of common thread. Many developed countries approach gun ownership not as an absolute right, but as a privilege requiring rigorous vetting, clear purpose, and comprehensive safety training.
Exactly. Other advanced nations like Germany, Finland, Italy, France, and the United Kingdom have far stricter gun control measures than the United States. They commonly employ universal background checks, often including things like psychiatric evaluations for younger applicants in Germany, proof of a genuine reason for ownership like sport shooting or collecting in Italy and France, and very strict storage requirements across the board. And in the UK, handguns are almost entirely illegal for private citizens.
And it's not just about what happens within a country's borders, is it? We've seen how lax laws in one place can undermine stricter measures elsewhere.
That's a critical point, highlighting the transnational impact of gun policy. The 2011 Norway attack is a tragic illustration of this. Anders Breivik, despite Norway's strong gun control laws, managed to obtain high-capacity magazines from a U.S. supplier. In his manifesto, he explicitly stated his envy of European-American brothers, because, in his words, gun laws in Europe sucks ass in comparison. He even detailed how he had 10 30-round ammunition magazines for his rifle mailed to him from a U.S. supplier.
Unbelievable.
It demonstrates how even the most robust national controls can be undercut by the transnational flow of weapons and accessories. It highlights the global challenge of firearm regulation. It's a stark reminder that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, whether that link is a state, a country, or an international border.
That global context is essential, really helps frame things. But now it's time to zero in on the situation here at home. Let's look at the dynamic and often contentious history of gun policy right here in the United States. We've seen a pendulum swing over the decades, haven't we? From landmark agreements aimed at tightening controls to significant legislative battles and even rollbacks.
The U.S. approach has indeed been a complex tapestry of federal and state actions, often reflecting deeply divided political and cultural viewpoints. It makes it quite unique in the developed world.
Let's start with some key policy milestones from the Clinton and Obama administrations. In March 2000, during the Clinton administration, we saw what was called a historic agreement with Smith & Wesson. This was framed at the time as an unprecedented partnership between the government and the gun industry.
Yes, and what's truly fascinating here is that this agreement aimed to bring about fundamental changes in gun design, distribution, and marketing, directly engaging a major manufacturer. It required Smith & Wesson to implement external locking devices on handguns within 60 days and internal locking devices within 24 months. They also committed to dedicating 2% of their annual firearms revenue to developing smart gun technology, tech that would limit a gun's use to its authorized owner, with this technology supposed to be included in new models within 36 months.
And it went further than just gun design, didn't it? It addressed magazine capacity and distribution practices as well.
Yes, it was quite comprehensive for its time. The agreement stipulated that new firearms would not be able to accept ammunition magazines with a capacity of over 10 rounds, building on a manufacturing prohibition already in place since 1994. All firearms were to be tested by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives, or ATF, to ensure they met performance and safety standards, including drop tests. Within 1 year, all pistols were supposed to have chamber load indicators to show if a pistol was loaded, and magazine disconnectors would be available to customers. On the distribution side, dealers were required to implement security plans to prevent gun theft. The agreement also prohibited sales to dealers who sold large-capacity magazines or semi-automatic assault weapons. And to deter illegal gun trafficking, new limits were placed on multiple handgun sales. Purchasers could only take one handgun on the day of sale, with the remainder available 14 days later. This was a significant, albeit ultimately quite contentious attempt to get the industry to self-regulate.
Okay. Moving forward, the Bush administration had a different approach. Notably, the 1994 assault weapons ban, which had been in place for a decade, was allowed to expire in 2004 under his watch. That was a big shift. Then, after the horrific Sandy Hook tragedy in 2012, the Obama administration responded with a series of executive actions in 2013.
Right. The Obama administration announced 23 executive actions following Sandy Hook, focusing on areas where the president could act without needing congressional approval. These included measures to expand background checks, enhance the tracing of crime guns, and improve mental health reporting to the background check system, all aiming to prevent prohibited individuals from acquiring firearms.
And beyond the executive actions, President Obama also made very direct calls to Congress, didn't he?
Yes, he urged Congress to pass universal background checks, to restore the ban on military-style assault weapons and 10-round magazine limits, and to create tougher penalties for straw purchasers, those individuals who illegally buy guns for others. When we put this in context, these administrations show a real spectrum of engagement, from direct industry collaboration under Clinton to executive actions and calls for legislative change under Obama. The recurring themes of background checks, assault weapons, and high-capacity magazines demonstrate these enduring points of contention and consistent priorities for gun control advocates over the years.
But here's a surprising twist, maybe not surprising to some, but the current federal administration has taken a distinctly different, comprehensive path. It's largely focused on rolling back regulations and prioritizing gun rights. It represents a truly significant reorientation in federal gun policy.
Indeed. The current federal administration has fundamentally reoriented its approach to gun violence. It has largely framed gun violence as primarily a crime problem rather than a public health issue, which is a crucial distinction, as you know. If you see it as purely a crime problem, your solutions tend to focus on law enforcement and punishment. If it's a public health issue, you look at prevention, root causes, epidemiology, community-based solutions, just like we would with the disease outbreak. This ideological shift really informs its entire policy agenda.
And they've moved swiftly to implement this new direction. In February 2025, an executive order was signed directing a review of all federal actions from 2021-2025 that were deemed to have impinged on Second Amendment rights. The goal was explicitly to halt or undo these policies.
Yeah. Exactly. This broad directive set the stage for significant regulatory rollbacks, particularly at the ATF. For instance, in April 2025, the ATF repealed its zero-tolerance policy.
Yeah.
This was a critical policy that previously revoked the licenses of gun dealers for repeated paperwork errors.
Yeah.
Gun control groups widely condemned this move, arguing it benefited gun sellers knowingly endangering communities and the gun CEOs getting rich from dangerous sales, basically by making it harder to hold those dealers accountable for errors.
And beyond that policy, they also targeted specific types of firearms and accessories, didn't they?
Yes. The pistol brace rule, which the previous administration put in place, well, that was ended. That rule had classified certain stabilizing braces as regulated by the National Firearms Act because they could essentially convert pistols into concealable short-barreled rifles. Reversing that makes it easier for individuals to create weapons that sort of blur the line between pistols and short-barreled rifles, potentially increasing their lethality and concealability. It effectively undid a previous effort to close what was seen as a loophole. Furthermore, in May 2025, the sale of force reset triggers was approved. These devices allow semi-automatic firearms to fire, essentially like fully automatic machine guns. This is significant given that the Supreme Court had already reversed the bump stock ban back in 2024. Yeah. So these actions collectively facilitate access to devices that dramatically increase a weapon's rate of fire, mimicking illegal machine guns.
Wow. It sounds like a systematic dismantling of existing federal gun violence prevention infrastructure across the government.
That's precisely what it appears to be, based on the actions taken. For example, the June 2024 Surgeon General's advisory, which had declared gun violence a public health crisis. Well, that was removed from the Department of Health and Human Services website by March 2025. The White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention, created in 2023, was unofficially shuttered. Its website taken offline, no operation since the inauguration apparently. Even the Federal School Safety Clearinghouse, a resource created post-Parkland to share school safety research, disbanded. These actions signal a clear move away from a public health framework for gun violence and towards a much narrower focus.
And this reorientation extended into the judicial and law enforcement branches as well. It wasn't just regulatory.
Absolutely. Attorney General Pam Bondi, appointed early in 2025, created a Second Amendment task force in April 2025. Her stated aim was to use department-wide policy and litigation resources to advance President Trump's pro-gun agenda. The Department of Justice was also directed to stop defending certain gun restrictions in court and review ongoing litigation to change the government's legal positions, explicitly to protect gun rights. This means the federal government is actively aligning its legal strategies with gun rights advocacy groups.
I'm also seeing some, frankly, concerning information about budget cuts and restructuring plan for the ATF. This sounds like it could severely impact their capacity to do their job.
That's another critical area where the administration's policy is having a direct, tangible effect. The Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, a new initiative.
DOGE. Okay.
Yes, DOGE is specifically targeting the ATF. The proposed fiscal year 2026 budget includes a $468 million reduction for the ATF. That would be its lowest budget since at least 2016. There's also a plan to refocus ATF enforcement and regulatory priorities, and an order for 80% of ATF's roughly 2,500 agents to take on immigration enforcement tasks. That diverts crucial resources away from investigating violent crime and enforcing existing gun laws. There's even consideration of merging the ATF and the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA. And in a highly symbolic move, a memorial for gun violence victims that had been created in April 2025 at ATF headquarters was removed, further emphasizing the shift in institutional priorities.
What about legislative priorities? Are there any new laws being actively pushed at the federal level?
Yes, the administration is backing the constitutional Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act, introduced in January 2025. This proposed law would require all states to recognize concealed carry permits from any other state. Essentially, it imposes the weakest state's concealed carry rules nationwide. This means someone with a permit from a state with minimal requirements could legally carry a concealed weapon in a state with much stricter laws, effectively undermining those state-level gun control efforts. There's also strong support for arming school personnel, allowing trained teachers to carry weapons, and providing federal funding for armed school security. Proposals include letting states use federal education funds to arm staff and offering bonuses to teachers who carry guns. This reflects a belief that more guns in vetted hands will deter or stop school shooters.
And these actions seem to have had a direct impact on funding for prevention programs at the community level, too.
Absolutely. Grants for domestic violence prevention organizations and community-based violence intervention, or CVI, programs have been terminated. That's nearly $169 million in cuts to CVI programs alone. These are often programs with proven track records in local communities for reducing violence through targeted outreach. The SWP School Violence Program and $1 billion in Department of Education grants for student mental health support have also been cut. These cuts directly impact the infrastructure designed to prevent violence and support mental well-being in schools and communities.
This also seems to have a direct impact on veteran services, which is particularly concerning given the statistics on veteran suicide we often hear about.
It's a very troubling aspect, yes.
Yeah.
Plans are underway to lay off over 80,000 workers at the Department of Veterans Affairs, the VA, including employees with the Veterans Crisis Line. This is happening despite an average of 18 veterans dying by suicide daily, with 13 of those by firearm. Veterans are 3 times more likely to die by firearm suicide than their non-veteran counterparts. It just underscores the critical need for robust crisis support services, not cuts. This particular action really highlights the intersection of gun policy, mental health services, and the well-being of a particularly vulnerable population.
So how are different groups reacting to this comprehensive deregulation focus? It sounds like a deeply polarizing moment, maybe more than ever.
It has predictably created intense polarization across the country. Gun rights organizations like the NRA, GOA, and NSSF have enthusiastically welcomed Trump's agenda. They see key demands being met and offer strong political support. Conversely, gun control groups such as Giffords, Brady, and Everytown prominent advocates for stricter gun laws have strongly condemned the approach. They're warning it will reverse progress and worsen gun violence. They've responded with mobilization, protests, and lawsuits calling for state resistance. Polls consistently show majority public support for stricter gun laws. Things like universal background checks, red flag laws, assault weapon bans, but the administration appears unmoved by that public opinion. This has led to legal clashes between federal and Democratic-led state authorities, creating a deeply polarized and, frankly, emotional debate across the country. The larger implication here is a stark divide, where federal policy is actively moving in one direction, while significant public opinion and many state-level actions are pushing hard in the opposite.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Moving deeper into the why behind gun violence, let's tackle the intricate relationship between mental health, political ideology, and gun violence. It's a connection that's often oversimplified or, frankly, misunderstood in public discourse, isn't it?
Absolutely. The conversation around mental health and gun violence is particularly fraught. It often leads to stigmatization rather than nuanced understanding, which ultimately hinders effective prevention efforts.
One core issue that consistently comes up is funding for mental health services. Medicaid is such a vital source for these services in the United States, and proposed cuts could have a really cascading negative effect.
Indeed. Cuts to Medicaid could significantly reduce access to therapy, medication, and long-term support, especially for low-income individuals who rely heavily on it. This would inevitably disrupt treatment plans, strain the entire healthcare system through potential clinic closures, worsening workforce shortages, and it could potentially increase crisis risk for those with serious mental illnesses. Research does indicate that while the relationship is complex, a lack of effective treatment is one of the most consistent risk factors for violence in individuals with serious mental illnesses. It can potentially lead to psychotic episodes if left untreated.
But it's really crucial to make a distinction here, isn't it? The media often paints this picture of mass shooters as being mentally ill, but that narrative can be misleading and incredibly harmful.
It is. And this is where clarity is essential. What's truly fascinating, or perhaps troubling here, is that while accessible and quality mental health care is undeniably essential for a healthy society, directly equating mental illness with mass shootings risks unfairly stigmatizing a vast group of people who are far more likely to be victims than perpetrators of violence. Numerous studies emphasize that mass shootings are rare acts of violence and often anecdotal distortions when viewed against the actions of mentally ill people as an aggregate group. These events just occur too infrequently for statistical modeling to accurately predict them based on mental health histories alone. In fact, people are far more likely to be shot by relatives, friends, enemies, or acquaintances than by these lone violent psychopaths the media sometimes focuses on. For example, a 2013 New York City police report found one was more likely to die in a plane crash, drown in a bathtub, or perish in an earthquake than be murdered by a crazed stranger in that city. This narrative often deflects from other, more prevalent risk factors for gun violence, things like social networks, economic stress, easy firearm availability. These are the common things we can build evidence from.
Okay, that's a really important clarification. This brings us to another important and, frankly, disturbing trend: the rise of ideologically motivated shootings and how online radicalization plays a role. We're seeing research that points to a notable increase in mass shootings perpetrated by right-wing extremists in America since about 2015.
This is a critical area of study, yes, and it introduces a different dimension to our understanding of gun violence. Right-wing extremism is generally defined as a reaction to perceptions of negative change that aims to revert fundamental features of the political system to some imagined past state. This type of motivation seems to be creating a distinct profile for some perpetrators of mass violence.
And this distinct profile is quite different from the mentally ill lone wolf stereotype we just discussed. It really challenges that conventional narrative, doesn't it?
Precisely. A recent analysis by Bryn Schwitter found significant differences in ideologically motivated mass shooters compared to other types. They were less likely to struggle with documented mental health issues, less likely to experience disruptive life events in the 6 months prior to their attacks, but they were more likely to rely on semi-automatic firearms and, tragically, more likely to kill more victims during their attacks. This suggests that the motivations and pathways to violence can be very different when ideology is the driving force. It requires different prevention strategies than just focusing on mental health history.
So how do online platforms fit into this picture? It seems like they've created a whole new ecosystem for this kind of radicalization.
They absolutely have. They act as accelerants for these ideological motivations in several crucial ways. First, they offer validation and echo chambers. Individuals with fringe beliefs can find communities online that validate their grievances and reinforce hateful ideologies, normalizing extreme views that might otherwise be rejected in mainstream society. Second, they serve as a platform for propaganda and inspiration. Extremist groups use online forums and social media to spread propaganda, manifestos, violent content, often glorifying past attacks and inspiring others to act. Finally, the internet facilitates connection. It allows individuals who might be isolated offline to connect with like-minded people globally, accelerating radicalization and turning what might have been personal grievances into broader ideological missions.
And what role does political rhetoric play in all of this? We hear a lot about its potential impact in the news cycle.
Many researchers identify a positive association between a rise in violent political rhetoric and an increase in mass shootings. This rhetoric can be dangerous for a couple of reasons. It can dehumanize. Language that describes the other, whether immigrants, minorities, political opponents, in dehumanizing ways can erode social norms against violence and legitimize aggression in the minds of those receptive to such messages. It can also fuel grievances. It contributes to a sense of victimhood or anger among those who feel their way of life is threatened, potentially stimulating racism, xenophobia, and anger towards specific targets.
And how has the current administration responded when these ideologically motivated shootings have occurred, particularly if the shooters lean towards right-wing views that might echo some political themes?
While the administration has consistently condemned mass shootings and called for unity, when an ideologically motivated shooting occurs, the administration's reaction has typically focused on the shooter's mental state while also condemning hatred and bigotry in general terms. However, there's been a notable emphasis on avoiding drawing a direct link between the shooter's specific political views and the administration's own rhetoric, even when researchers identify that positive association between such rhetoric and an increase in mass shootings.
Okay, so the key takeaway here seems to be that tackling gun violence effectively means moving beyond the simplistic mental illness narrative. We have to confront the uncomfortable truth of online radicalization and political rhetoric's potential impact on extreme violence. This calls for a really multi-pronged prevention strategy, doesn't it? Including things like digital literacy, maybe discourse accountability. It makes prevention all the more complex.
Right. Despite the legislative battles and these complex social factors we've been discussing, there's a powerful and growing movement advocating for evidence-based solutions to gun violence right here in the U.S. Let's look at what's being done and what the data clearly supports.
This is where the public health approach comes strongly into play, shifting the focus from blame to prevention and intervention. The Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Violence Solutions, for instance, uses rigorous research to inform advocacy, directly addressing gun violence as a public health emergency. Their work is really influential. And it seems like there's significant public appetite for these types of solutions. The Johns Hopkins National Survey of Gun Policy, which has been administered every 2 years since 2013, consistently shows broad public support for many gun violence prevention policies.
That's a crucial point. This support isn't limited to non-gun owners. It spans gun owners, crosses political affiliations, and is consistent across geographic regions. The trends even suggest growing national support for a number of policies to reduce gun violence in the U.S. The 2025 survey data highlights this. 82% support removing guns during a domestic violence protection order, or DVPO. 72% support firearm purchaser licensing laws, often called permit to purchase. 77% support family-initiated extreme risk protection orders, or ERPOs, and 74% support requiring someone to lock up their guns when not in use. These aren't niche ideas. They have broad, often bipartisan backing from the public.
Let's delve into some of these key policy priorities and their proven impact. Starting with firearm purchaser licensing, also known as permit to purchase laws, what does that entail exactly?
These laws involve a multi-step process. Typically, you need a permit before you can buy a gun, especially handguns. Getting that permit often requires extensive background checks, sometimes mental and physical health evaluations, and sometimes demonstrating a genuine reason for ownership, similar to what we discussed in other countries. Oregon's Measure 114, which was voter-approved in November 2022, is a recent example. It restricted high-capacity magazines and required handgun purchaser licensing. The Oregon Alliance for a Safe Oregon is now actively defending that measure against multiple lawsuits, which just shows the ongoing battle even after public approval at the ballot box.
Another policy getting a lot of attention is firearm removal laws, or extreme risk protection orders, often called red flag laws, or ERPOs.
Right. These laws allow law enforcement, or in some states family members, to petition a court for the temporary removal of firearms from individuals who are deemed to pose a significant danger to themselves or others. The arguments in favor highlight their proactive prevention potential. There's evidence suggesting effectiveness in preventing suicides and even potentially mass shootings. Proponents also emphasize their temporary nature and due process protections. It's not permanent confiscation without review. There are hearings where individuals can present their case. Connecticut actually adopted the first ERPO law way back in 1999. California followed in 2016, and groups like Colorado Ceasefire were instrumental in enacting an extreme risk law in their state more recently.
We've also talked about community gun violence as a distinct problem, separate from mass shootings or suicides. What about interventions focused there?
Community gun violence intervention, or CVI, programs are vital for that. These are localized, community-based approaches aimed at addressing the root causes and cycles of gun violence. They often involve trusted messengers, people from the community who work directly with individuals at the highest risk of shooting or being shot. Live Free Illinois' Fund Peace campaign is an excellent example. They secured $200 million in state funding for violence prevention and are now working towards establishing a permanent office of gun violence prevention in Chicago. North Carolinians Against Gun Violence is another group actively advocating for CVI funding in their state.
One area where the data is particularly compelling, you mentioned earlier, is firearm suicide prevention. This often gets less attention than mass shootings, but the numbers are just heartbreaking.
It's a critical area, yes, and it's where strong gun laws show some of the most significant impact. It's where we see some of the clearest evidence of lives saved. Everytown research found that from 1999 to 2022, states with the strongest gun safety laws, places like California, Connecticut, Hawaii, Illinois, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, they actually saw a 4% decrease in gun suicide rates over that long period. But in stark contrast, states with the weakest laws experienced a 39% increase in gun suicide rates over the same period. That's a profound difference.
And there's that common misconception, isn't there? That if someone is suicidal, they'll just find another way to end their life regardless of gun access. Does the data actually support that idea?
No, it really does not. Critically, research consistently shows that restricting access to lethal means, specifically guns, does not lead to significant increases in suicide by other methods. Suicidal crises are often impulsive and short-lived, sometimes lasting only minutes or hours. Guns are incredibly lethal, with about a 90% fatality rate in suicide attempts, compared to maybe 4% for other common methods. So if a gun isn't immediately available during that critical, fleeting window of intense crisis, a life can often be saved. It allows time for the impulse to pass, or for intervention and support. This is why safe storage is so crucial. States with the most protective, secure gun storage laws saw lower rates of gun suicide among youth, ages 10-24, in 2022 compared to 1999, while states with no such laws saw a staggering 36% increase in youth gun suicides. Organizations like New Mexicans to Prevent Gun Violence and North Carolinians Against Gun Violence are actively distributing free gun locks and education to promote safe storage practices.
What about holding the gun industry accountable? That seems like another key priority for advocates, especially given some of the marketing practices we've seen or the design choices.
Yes, gun industry accountability aims to hold manufacturers responsible for dangerous sales and marketing practices, much like other industries are held accountable for the safety and effects of their products. Colorado ceasefire, for instance, helped repeal gun industry immunity in their state, which allows victims to pursue lawsuits. Similarly, One Aim, Illinois passed the Firearms Industry Responsibility Act, or FIRA. That law allows victims to take legal action against manufacturers and also bans firearm advertising specifically targeted at minors. Delaware has also successfully repealed gun industry immunity. These laws address the legal protections, like the federal PLCAA law, that often shield gun manufacturers from liability even in cases of negligence.
And universal background checks, which we touched on earlier, they remain a major policy goal with consistently strong public support, correct?
Absolutely. Universal background checks are consistently supported by a vast majority of Americans, including many gun owners. It highlights a significant disconnect between public opinion and current federal policy, where loopholes still allow many private gun sales without a background check. It's often seen as a foundational element, sort of the bare minimum for any comprehensive gun safety strategy.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me, connecting these dots. The evidence clearly shows that specific targeted policies like strong safe storage laws or extreme risk laws can make a measurable difference in saving lives, especially in areas like suicide prevention. It directly challenges some long-held assumptions about their effectiveness or potential downsides. It's not just about one sweeping law, is it? It's more like a suite of layered policies that work together.
Exactly. And we're seeing this play out through innovative, determined advocacy models at the state and local levels, often in the face of federal resistance or inaction.
Let's talk about some of these state-level successes and the unique approaches they're taking. New Mexicans to Prevent Gun Violence, for example, sounds like they do more than just lobby.
They really do. New Mexicans to Prevent Gun Violence, or NMPGV, has published a comprehensive gun violence prevention toolkit for communities. They run highly successful creative programs like Guns to Gardens. In that program, unwanted firearms collected in buybacks are literally deconstructed and turned into garden tools by blacksmiths. It transforms instruments of potential harm into tools that help the community thrive.
That's incredible.
Isn't it? They also have Murals to End Gun Violence, a youth-led initiative that uses art to raise awareness and promote peace, and they actively distribute free gun safety education and gun locks. It's a very holistic approach combining grassroots activism with tangible community projects.
In Washington state, the Alliance for Gun Responsibility has a unique way of engaging with legislators and the public, focusing on accountability.
They do. They track and grade state legislators on gun responsibility, essentially providing a counter-narrative to the NRA's legislative scorecard. This helps elevate support of elected officials and holds others accountable for their votes on gun safety measures. They report seeing an increase in champions for gun safety over the years as a result. They also do important work educating on the intersection of gun violence with other critical social issues like suicide prevention, domestic violence, and racism, framing the issue broadly as a public health concern impacting diverse communities in different ways.
And Colorado ceasefire has been instrumental in passing some pretty significant laws there.
They've achieved major gun reform in Colorado. We mentioned repealing gun industry immunity and enacting extreme risk laws. They also helped establish a minimum firearm purchasing age of 21, institute a 3-day waiting period for all gun transfers, and ban ghost guns, those untraceable, privately made firearms. These are comprehensive, multifaceted policy victories that demonstrate how focused, sustained advocacy can lead to substantial legislative change, even in a state with a strong gun culture tradition.
Delaware has also made significant strides recently, it sounds like.
Yes, the Delaware Coalition Against Gun Violence, or DCAG, successfully advocated for what they call a historic legislative package in 2022. This package included increasing the minimum age for firearm purchase to 21, banning assault-style weapons, automatic conversion devices like bump stocks, and high-capacity magazines. It also strengthened their background check system, and they too repealed gun industry immunity. It was a very significant set of reforms, especially coming in the wake of the tragedies in Buffalo and Uvalde, showing how state governments can respond decisively when motivated.
And in the South, North Carolinians Against Gun Violence has achieved a first for the region, which is notable.
Very notable. North Carolinians Against Gun Violence, or NCGV, led a coalition to advocate for the creation of the statewide Office of Violence Prevention, or OVP. It was established by executive order in March 2023, making it the first statewide OVP in the South. NCGV now serves as an advisory board member for this office. The OVP acts as a state clearinghouse to address all forms of gun violence through evidence-informed policies, increasing grant funding for local programs, and coordinating efforts among state agencies and non-governmental organizations. It's a truly innovative, systemic approach to addressing violence across the state. Stepping back, the ingenuity and the resilience of these state-level initiatives really demonstrate the power of sustained, localized advocacy. These groups are not just waiting for federal action, which, as we've discussed, is often stalled or moving in the opposite direction. They're adapting, they're innovating, they're working with diverse stakeholders, from law enforcement and public health professionals to faith leaders and community members. They're implementing solutions that resonate with their unique communities, often directly pushing back against broader federal deregulation trends. This bottom-up approach is proving to be a powerful engine for change, proving that local action can, and absolutely does, save lives.
We've journeyed through such a vast landscape of information today, haven't we? From Japan's extreme caution to Australia's sweeping reforms, Switzerland's unique gun culture, and the deeply polarized yet also highly active policy arena here in the U.S. It's been a lot to take in, but I really hope it's given you a clearer, more nuanced picture. Let's quickly summarize some of the key takeaways from our deep dive. Globally, we've seen that different nations demonstrate vastly different outcomes based on their cultural relationship with firearms and the strictness of their laws. It's not one size fits all. This ranges from Japan's near zero tolerance approach to Switzerland's highly regulated but widespread ownership, proving that cultural context matters immensely in shaping policy and outcomes. Here in the U.S., we've witnessed the dynamic, often volatile nature of policy, with the federal approach undergoing a dramatic shift towards deregulation under the current administration. They're actively rolling back previous measures and promoting gun rights. And this stands in stark opposition to broad public support for stricter laws, creating a significant and ongoing tension.
We also unpack the complex causes of violence. The link between mental illness and gun violence is frequently oversimplified and stigmatizing. Instead, research suggests that ideological extremism, often amplified and fueled by online platforms and political rhetoric, is emerging as a significant and distinct driver for some mass shootings. This creates a different profile of perpetrator that demands a multifaceted approach to prevention, looking beyond just mental health histories.
But despite these political headwinds and the complex social factors, there's powerful hope. Evidence-based policies like extreme risk protection orders, firearm purchaser licensing, secure storage laws, and community violence intervention programs are proven to reduce gun deaths, particularly suicides. The data is there. And these solutions are being successfully implemented by tenacious state and local advocacy groups, demonstrating that action at every level can and does make a measurable difference in saving lives. So, as you reflect on this deep dive, maybe consider this. In a world awash with information and increasingly polarized viewpoints, where do we find the common ground? Where do we find the shared will to act on what the data clearly shows can save lives? Is the most effective path forward in establishing comprehensive national standards, trying to bridge that federal state divide, or is it primarily in empowering local communities and states to continue innovating with solutions that resonate with their unique needs and challenges, building change from the ground up? Something to think about.